Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedlie, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so honored that you're taking time to join us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Tricia Springstubb. She's here to celebrate the most perfect thing in the universe. Before we invite Tricia into the studio, we want to let you know we have a brand new Reading with Your Kids certified great read. Mia, the Monster of Fear and the Fairy of Courage, is our latest Reading with Your Kids certified great read. This book was written by Tricia Sanders, and in the book, kids will discover what makes the monster of fear show up while learning that in these moments, the fairy of courage will always be a great help. This gentle, comforting story follows a little girl named Mia who is about to embark on her first day at a new school. Starting a new grade is both exciting and loaded with anticipation for Mia. She constantly worries about fitting in and making new friends. To make the matter worse, the monster of fear befriends Mia and advises her to make all the wrong choices, such as not talking to her teacher or her classmates. Mia loses her self-confidence and is convinced that it is just easier to be nothing. Just when Mia is about to give up her dream, the Fairy of Courage shows up and reassures Mia that she can be anything she wants to become if she truly believes in herself. We love this book, and we encourage you to check it out. Mia and the Monster of Fear and the Fairy of Courage by Tricia Sanders is our latest Reading with Your Kids certified great read. You can read our full review at readingwithyourkids.com. Join us right now from Cleveland in the state of Ohio. We are really excited to speak to the author of The Most Perfect Thing in the Universe, Tricia Springstubb. Tricia, how are you?
I'm great. I'm perfect, actually.
That's wonderful.
So nice to meet you, Jed.
I was going to say, so nice of you to write a book all about me, but I'm probably wrong. It's probably not about me.
I think it's kind of one of those subjective things. I don't think there's really one most perfect thing in the universe, so I think you're probably one of them. Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much. This has gotten off to a great start. I'm excited. So tell us about the most perfect thing in the universe from your perspective.
Yeah, this is a middle grade novel. The main character is 10 or 11, Loa Londonderry. She's a shy, timid, but steadfast girl. She's a homebody. Her mother, Dr. Londonderry, is a noted ornithologist who's dedicated to saving endangered species of birds, especially those that live in the Arctic tundra. And I think we all know that the Arctic is really threatened by climate change. So her work is really urgent and important, but it also takes her away from Loa, who misses her and worries about her. So it's a book about what happens when Dr. Londonderry goes off on a pretty risky solo expedition, and Loa finds herself home with her caretakers, who then fall ill. And so now she's really alone, and some sort of spooky things start happening in her house, and there's also a housing inspector who thinks that the house is possibly uninhabitable, and so all kinds of complications and problems fall on little Loa's shoulders, and so the book is really about Loa has to find her own hidden strength and make her own sort of little expedition to save the place and the things that she loves.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow, talk about a whole lot of threads that you can pull. What an amazing story. I think that. Do you feel? I remember. It was almost 100 years ago, but I remember being that age, that middle grade age, and even though I was surrounded by family, sometimes like too much, grew up in that,
Yes.
that neighborhood where everybody was related to me somehow. There were times when I felt alone. Do you think that's kind of like a universal feeling that kids experience?
Yes, I think it is. And for some kids, I think it's a small part of their growing up. And I think for some kids, it's a much bigger part. And for Loa, I really do explore that feeling of her mother, she knows that her mother loves her, but maybe her mother loves other things like her work as much. And so Loa sort of struggles with that feeling of finding out who she is and how she can manage and how she cannot be just helpless, how she can reach out and maybe find another family through friends to sustain her. So yeah, I love writing for middle grade. I think it's such a tender, sweet spot where kids are, of course, they are pulling away and wanting to be independent, but at the same time, they really want the security of home and family. So that's sort of one of the metaphors in this book, which has, as you would guess, a lot about birds. Mm-hmm. And so there's this tension between, loving your nest and yet wanting and needing to learn to fly from it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. As you were speaking about, Loa understanding that her mom loves her, but maybe her mom loves her job just as much. Mm-hmm. That kind of gave me like a boom, like a punch to the chest. Mm-hmm. That must, and I know that there are kids in that kind of situation, and probably a lot of kids who are in the situation when they realize that, wow, my dad, my mom, they love their job more than me. Mm-hmm. Again, it's just this punch. That in a lot of ways, that just must be devastating.
Yeah. I actually could read you a tiny bit about that from the book, if that's okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
This is towards the end when Loa has, come through a lot of the struggles that I described earlier. And she's thinking about life as an expedition. And she said, many times, the expedition would be hard. You discover things you'd rather not. Maybe you discover that though your mother loved you, she loved the natural world just as much. Maybe sometimes she loved it even more than she loved you. To fight for it, to protect it, she'd leave you. Again and again, her work would pull her away from you. The mockingbird sang and Loa closed her eyes. Mama had to be Mama, and Loa had to be Loa. Only not exactly the Loa she used to be. Mama would go away, and she would stay home. And that would never be easy, but it would be different now. Loa drew a breath and felt it fill her. She stretched her legs and knew they'd grown. Always, always, she would want Mama to come home. But it would be a different kind of wanting. Not the helpless kind, because Loa wasn't helpless, not anymore. And so I think that's, kind of encapsulates some of what the book is about of, like I said, discovering yourself and edging a little bit out of that nest, growing and spreading your wings a little bit. Yeah.
The Reading with Your Kids podcast, we're always encouraging families to read, encouraging parents to model reading, to let their kids catch them with a book as often as possible. And if it's not a physical book, get that Kindle open. Let your kids know that you're not looking at TikTok on your phone. You may be reading a book or reading a newspaper. But we also encourage families to read with their kids who are independent readers. So obviously this is a book that middle grade kids and older will be reading on their own. But I think that this is a wonderful book for families to read together or to co-read, because I think it can inspire some really, really wonderful conversations and maybe some difficult conversations too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope for that with all my books, really, that they will spark some kind of conversation and connection, and some discovery, and some, something that families can take away and continue to think about, and talk about. Yeah. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
Yeah, because as you're saying, we're living in a time where our planet needs warriors like Loa's mom.
Yeah.
But Loa also needs her mom. But I think there are a lot of families out there where parents, and I think that this would be a wonderful kind of a wake up for a family to read this, and for a parent who's not home as much as he or she would like to be, to kind of sit down and say, okay, am I really fighting the good fight like Loa's mom, or can this project at work wait for me for the weekend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, the book, it has an ecological theme that kind of goes through it, because we do know the importance of Loa's work and Loa's mother's work. And so there is an afterword, and there's also a bibliography, and my website will have various projects and hands-on activities that, classrooms or families can do together. I mean, if this book does inspire to, a realization about the interconnectedness and the sort of fragility of all the planet's creatures. So those are things that families could maybe take away too, as an after effect of the book, and maybe do some of those things together, even if it's just going bird watching.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Bird watching is very cool. I've never thought of myself as a bird watcher until we moved to lovely Reedville, and somehow managed to find a home right next to a wildlife sanctuary, and so we have just wonderful, different birds visiting. We're on a migration route, and so this type of bird in March and this type of bird in July, and different birds make their homes and come back every year. It's really neat.
I think one of the fun things for me writing this book is that, of course, I started writing it before the pandemic, but I was editing it and revising it during this last year. And so many people became bird watchers over the last year, because I think, the birds were out more. There was less traffic. There was less pollution. And people had a little more time on their hands to do things and to appreciate nature. So that's been a real treat for me as this book comes out into the world, to see how many, like me, newborn bird watchers there are. And also to just read about birds and the amazing, astonishing wonderful life of birds. And to see, like I said, the nest and the flying is a little metaphor that I used. And also, if you read the book, you'll discover what the most perfect thing is, which is also has to do with birds. But there's so many parallels to the book too. I mean, there are birds like the Arctic tern. It migrates farther than any creature on Earth. Yearly, it flies from pole to pole and back. Wow. Like over, 25,000 miles, mostly over water. Like, how does it do that? And then there are birds that, they hatch in your backyard and they rarely go any further than your front yard. So there's so many different, that reflects, sort of the differences in people in the book, Loa versus her mother. And, so that was so much fun to discover all these, about these creatures that are around us all the time. And to incorporate some of that into the book.
So this is a great time of discovery for you. I'm curious, what inspired you to write this book and to, get into this area where there was still so much for you to learn?
Well, I'm honest. I'll say that this book went through a lot of iterations. I originally was writing it, I tried to write a historical novel, and failed pretty miserably because even though I enjoyed doing some of the research, I found when it came time to actually write, I couldn't stay within the bounds of, historical fact. I kept making stuff up, and so I had to abandon that idea. But I had, in the course of writing that first version of the book, I had created Loa, and she is essentially, even though she's moved into the 21st century, and to probably the outskirts of Cleveland, she has remained pretty much the same character, someone who, misses her mother, who is in the care of caretakers who she's not, sometimes they don't get along. She lives in a somewhat spooky house. All of those things were in my original book, but now as I said, they're contemporary. But Loa just won my heart. She's this timid, not heroic at all child, but she's steadfast and loyal. And when she finds something that she loves, she will stand by it, or by that person. So I think it was just Loa and her character that stuck with me. And the birds, almost, I've written a number of middle grade novels, and they always seem to have birds in them. Birds will come and kind of flit through, be a little symbol, or maybe lead the character somewhere. In my book, Every Single Second, there's actually an important bird who has a little tiny arc in the story, but I never gave birds, the kind of, made them so integral to a book as I did with this. And I think it just was time for me to acknowledge how fascinated I am by birds and to find out more about them. And they're such wonderful, humans have used birds as symbols, and as subjects of poetry and art and music for forever. So, they're a really rich thing for me to explore here.
Yeah. I'm so happy that you shared, that you had the courage to share with us that, you were going in a completely different direction.
Oh, yeah.
When you began this project, because I think that, we've talked a lot about, how to inspire kids to read more or to create, find their voice, to help kids get that resiliency. I'm hoping that there's a parent out there that's listening to this right now who has a child that is going to fall in love with the most perfect thing in the universe and will remember the fact that when you started this, you were going in a completely different direction. To use your words, you failed completely, but you didn't let that stop you. You just pivoted. You changed. And I know if there's a kid out there that loves the most perfect thing in the universe and is having trouble with something and feels like a failure, their parent can just share this story with them and say, hey, if Tricia gave up on this, you wouldn't have that book that you cherish so much.
Yeah. I wish, if I could do a visual, I would hold up, the huge pile of papers and folders that is the many drafts and revisions and what a lot of kids call sloppy copies, as well as, the research and the feedback that I got from my editor who said this was working, but this wasn't. I mean, the last thing I ever want kids to think is that, writers sit down and they type out a book and here it is. It's a long process of exploration and discovery. And, I try not to use the word failure too much. I mean, that my idea to write a historical novel, I will probably never try that again. But when I talk to kids, I do say, I try not to think, oh, I made a big mistake. I try to think, oh, I can make this better. Mm-hmm. And so, if there was any word of advice I would have for future writers is that, speaking of perfect, I am never perfect. My work is never, ever perfect. The first or second or usually even the third time.
Yeah. Well, it is very important for people to understand that. And even when we have authors who come on who wrote maybe a 400-word picture book when they sit down and they say, oh, this just came to me in one swoop. And I always make sure that the people listening understand that, okay, the idea might have come at one time, but there was editing and the authors go, oh, yes, that's right. It took 2 years for this thing, actually. From that 1 hour that I sat down and most of it came out, then it took 2 years to polish it up and to make it into a book.
Yes. And I think picture books, I have written a couple of picture books, and I think they're the hardest of all to write, just for what you're saying, because, the language and the tone and the voice of those, there's no room to wander. It's as close to poetry as you can get. So it's a pretty demanding form. And the couple of times that I've been able to pull it off, I've really been over the moon. So... yeah. And that journey between, there's the idea, of course, we have loads of ideas, but how many of them turn into story is a different thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can find out more about the most perfect thing in the universe, and also want to find out more about Tricia Springstubb. Well,
I do have a website, triciaspringstubb.com, and also I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all those good things. But my website will have, it's not on there quite yet, but it will be on there, all kinds, like I said, of discussion questions and activities that you can do after reading The Most Perfect Thing in the Universe, and for my other books too. And I do have books from my 2 hard-won picture books through a chapter book series, through several middle grade novels. So, yeah, I hope people will explore a little bit and find if any of those, they enjoy any of those.
Awesome. Well, we've had a wonderful time speaking about the most perfect thing in the universe, and I was bummed out it wasn't me. We've been speaking with the author, Tricia Springstubb. Tricia, thank you so much for being on the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jed, and thanks for all you do to encourage reading for young people and for the adults who nurture them. That's a wonderful. I'm very grateful to you for doing that.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We have 2 wonderful guests coming to you. 2 wonderful guests celebrating their books that will be published by our friends at Familius Publishing. Michael Leanna will be here to celebrate Good Night Whispers. And Tracy C. Gold will also be joining us to talk about Everyone's Sleepy But the Baby. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, earlier on in the show, you heard me announce that Mia, the Monster of Fear and the Fairy of Courage by Cynthia Sanders is our latest Reading with Your Kids certified great read. We really want to congratulate Cynthia. And we want to encourage you, if you're the author of a fantastic children's book, to check out our Certified Great Read program. If our panel of teachers, parents, and kids believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. And with that distinction comes a number of really powerful tools that can help your book stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. Are you aware of the fact that there are literally thousands of books published every single month? It's really hard to stand out. The Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program has helped many, many authors stand out. We would love to help you. Go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll on down to Certified Great Reads. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Tricia Springstubb. Be sure to check out The Most Perfect Thing in the Universe. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.